Welcome to my channel of ZFA Stories. Don't forget to subscribe button and press on the bell icon for more inspiration and mind-blowing stories. The morning in Glendale was calm. The sky was a crystal clear blue and the sidewalk outside the local coffee shop was bustling with customers enjoying their morning drinks. Among them, sitting quietly at an outdoor table, was Michael Carter, a blind man who visited the shop every day. By his side was Zeus, his loyal German Shepherd, standing vigilant. Zeus was more than a guide dog. His firm posture and commanding presence came from years of training as a former canine unit. Now retired, Zeus had dedicated his life to protecting Michael, offering not just guidance but an emotional connection that the man deeply cherished. As Michael sipped his coffee in silence, the roar of 3 motorcycles broke the peaceful atmosphere. Pulling into a spot near the cafe, the loud engines drew the attention of everyone around. 3 men dismounted, clad in leather jackets adorned with striking patches. They seemed casual, but the way they surveyed their surroundings added an edge of tension. Chuck, the leader of the group, had a commanding presence. With a loud, confident laugh, he gestured animatedly while talking to his friends, asserting dominance over the space. Zeus, always alert, perked up his ear, sensing something unusual. The men began strolling between the tables, watching people as they went. Chuck noticed Zeus and Michael pausing for a moment to stare at the German Shepherd. "That's a big dog you've got there," he remarked, his tone prompting Zeus to lock eyes with him. Chuck chuckled at his own comment and leaned forward slightly as if testing the dog's reaction. Zeus stayed motionless, but there was something in his stance, a silent warning that spoke volumes about his read of the situation. Chuck, perhaps wanting to prove something, made an exaggerated gesture with his hands as if he were joking. "Is he really as smart as he looks?" he asked his friends, who laughed awkwardly. The atmosphere grew tenser. Zeus remained still, but his eyes never left Chuck. Michael, unaware of the glances around him, asked, "Is everything okay?" His voice sounded calm, but there was a hint of unease in it, as if he could sense the change in Zeus's behavior. The silence at the table contrasted with the chatter around them. Zeus was a dog trained for high-pressure situations, and his experience had taught him to stay calm until the right moment. Chuck, realizing he hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted, backed off slightly, but his laugh echoed again. Michael, still oblivious to what was happening, reached out to touch Zeus. "Are you okay, buddy?" he asked gently. Zeus responded by moving slightly closer to him, but his eyes never left Chuck, who was starting to feel the weight of his own actions. The atmosphere seemed to shift in the small outdoor area of the cafe while Michael finished his coffee. Chuck and his group's laughter grew louder, now tinged with a provocative tone. Zeus remained still by Michael's side, but anyone watching closely could see he was on full alert. His muscles were tense and his eyes followed Chuck's every move as if anticipating something yet to come. He wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian trained to protect at all costs. Chuck, feeling like the center of attention, approached Michael's table. He seemed completely oblivious to the fact that other patrons were watching. "You've got a nice-looking dog here, don't you?" he said playfully, though with a faint hint of disdain. Michael gave a slight smile, trying to keep the situation light. "Thanks, Zeus is my best friend." Chuck tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Zeus, a Greek god's name. Let's see if he lives up to it." Before Michael could respond, Chuck made a quick move, reaching out to touch Zeus's snout. It was a gesture that might have seemed harmless to onlookers, but for Zeus, trained to detect threats, it was enough to trigger his instincts. The German Shepherd didn't attack, but took a step back, letting out a low warning growl. The tension around them thickened, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the area. "Easy there, boy," Chuck said, raising his hands as if he were only joking, but there was a glint of challenge in his eyes. Michael, still not understanding what was happening, placed his hand on Zeus's neck, trying to calm him down. "Sorry if he scared you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Chuck just laughed, but his pride seemed to have been hurt by the dog's reaction. He stepped back, but his friends started to tease him. "So Chuck, you're going to let a dog put you in your place?" That one sentence changed the Mood Chuck, wanting to impress, looked back at Zeus with a smile full of intent. The leader of the group looked around and noticed that many people were watching the interaction, some even discreetly filming with their phones. Maybe that made him hesitate for a brief moment, but he wasn't the type to back down. Relax, guys, it's just a dog, he said dismissively, but Zeus knew the difference between play and danger, and although Michael couldn't see it, he started to feel that something wasn't right. Zeus, what's wrong? He asked in a whisper. The German chef just kept his eyes fixed on Chuck as if waiting for the next move. Chuck took a few steps back, but it wasn't a retreat. His friends kept laughing, egging him on with taunts, and it seemed to fuel the biker's already bruised pride. He stopped for a moment, staring at Zeus as if daring the dog to make a move. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Michael, still unaware of the malicious looks or the looming threat, tried to lighten the mood with a comment. He doesn't like it when people come on too strong. Maybe that scared him, but Chuck ignored the comment. He glanced at his friends, then at the people around him, as if looking for approval for what he was about to do. With a cold smile, he took a step toward Zeus, extending his hand again. Zeus, still seated, growled low, a clear warning to anyone who knew how to read it. The sound was almost inaudible, but powerful enough to make the onlookers flinch with concern. Still, Chuck seemed determined to test the limits. Come on, big guy, Chuck said with a forced laugh. Are you as tough as you look this time? Before the German shepherd could react, Chuck lightly tapped the side of Michael's chair, a move that caused Zeus to rise in one swift, firm motion. That gesture was the final straw for the animal. Zeus didn't charge, but his posture changed. He was now fully alert, his body tense like a boring, ready to snap. The crowd around them began to murmur, and a few people raised their phones to capture the scene. Michael, sensing the change in Zeus's behavior, furrowed his brow. He ran his hand over the dog's neck, trying to calm him down, but now he knew something was wrong. What's going on here? He asked aloud, his expression worried. Chuck just laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He knew he was playing with fire, but seemed unable to back down in front of his friends and the crowd. Nothing really, he replied, gesturing for Michael to relax. We're just messing around. At that moment, a woman who had been sitting nearby stood up. Hey, you need to stop this, she said firmly. Leave the dog alone. Her voice echoed across the sidewalk, and for the first time Chuck hesitated. Embarrassment began to take over, and he looked around, realizing the disapproving stares. Zeus didn't move, but kept staring at Chuck, ready to react to any sign of danger. The tension still hung in the air, like a rope about to snap. Chuck narrowed his eyes at the woman who confronted him, but said nothing. The crowd around them started to grow uneasy, exchanging glances between him, Zeus, and Michael, who now seemed even more confused. Feeling the discomfort rise, Chuck took a step back, but it wasn't to retreat for good. He had something else in mind. Relax, we're just having fun, he said, dismissively, trying to salvage what was left of his image, but inside he felt the need to assert his dominance. Zeus, on the other hand, remained still, observing every movement with surgical precision, as if reading the biker's next move. Michael tightened the leash on Zeus, murmuring, Zeus, calm down. What's going on? He couldn't see Chuck's threatening stance, but he could feel the tension in the air. Zeus wasn't an ordinary dog. He had been trained to protect, and at that moment he was in full alert mode. Michael trusted him completely, but the growing tension made him uneasy. The crowd around them seemed frozen with a heavy silence, making everything even more unsettling. Suddenly, Chuck made a sudden move. He pretended to back off, but in an impulsive act, he kicked one of the nearby chairs, pushing it towards Zeus. The sound of metal hitting the ground echoed down the street, and a few people gasped in surprise. Zeus reacted instantly, stepping to the side and dodging the chair with impressive agility. The dog growled more audibly now, his protective stance becoming even more evident. It was a clear warning that he would no longer tolerate any provocation. Hey, stop, the woman shouted again, this time with more authority. A few other people started speaking up, asking Chuck to stop he however seemed trapped in his own ego. What's the problem? You've never seen someone play with a dog before, he said, trying to maintain a carefree attitude, but his hands were clenched and it was clear he was no longer in control of the situation. Zeus stood firm, his eyes locked on Chuck as if analyzing every movement, ready to act if necessary. Michael finally realized something serious was happening. He slowly stood up, his hand firmly gripping Zeus's leash. "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" he asked aloud, his concern now obvious. But before anyone could respond, Chuck stepped forward, leaning toward Michael as if trying to intimidate him directly. The crowd held its breath, and Zeus, as if understanding the threat to his owner, lowered his head slightly, preparing to defend Michael at all costs. The tension reached its peak as Chuck took another step toward Michael. He was so close now that his presence was oppressive, even to someone who couldn't. "What's wrong, buddy? Hiding behind your dog?" Chuck mocked with a bitter laugh that seemed to hide his own discomfort. Michael, on the other hand, remained calm, though his voice trembled slightly. "Zeus never hides me from anything," he replied, gripping the dog's leash tightly. "He's here to protect me, and it seems like he knows something I don't." Zeus stayed still, but the growl in his throat grew louder with every passing second. The crowd around them, once hesitant, was now starting to murmur louder, clearly uncomfortable with Chuck's behavior. An older man sitting at a nearby table finally stood up and intervened. "Hey, this has gone too far. You should leave before something bad happens." But Chuck, driven by pride and the pressure from his friends, ignored the advice. He looked at the man as if he were just another obstacle, but the growing discomfort on his face began to show. Suddenly the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. Zeus barked loudly, a deep and firm bark that made Chuck instinctively step back. It was a sound that couldn't be ignored, and its meaning was clear. The dog was ready to act. The crowd reacted with surprise, some filming, others backing away. The energy shifted completely. Michael, noticing Zeus's bark, knew something serious was about to happen. "Zeus, it's okay, I'm fine," he said, trying to calm the German Shepherd, but Zeus kept his eyes locked on Chuck, as if saying he didn't trust those words. Then, in a final attempt to save his image, Chuck impulsively stepped forward, reaching out to push Michael by the shoulder. It was a quick move, but not fast enough to go unnoticed by Zeus. The German Shepherd reacted in the blink of an eye, positioning himself between Chuck and Michael with a swift move that placed him directly between the biker and his owner. Zeus didn't attack, but stood firm, his teeth slightly bared, a clear warning that this needed to end. Right there, the street fell into complete silence. Chuck froze, unable to react, while Zeus's gaze seemed to pierce him. Michael, now aware that something very serious had just happened, lifted his head and said firmly, "I think it's best if you leave now." The crowd around them began to murmur, this time against Chuck. He looked around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. Without saying another word, he slowly backed away, trying to hide his embarrassment. His friends followed him in silence, and within seconds the group vanished around the corner. The morning, which had started with the soft tones of routine, was now filled with murmurs and tension. Michael felt the air around him shift. Even without seeing, he could sense that the energy had changed. The sound of motorcycles in the distance faded, replaced by the muffled noise of people talking about what they had witnessed. Zeus, by his side, stayed alert, his body still tense, but there was something more. A subtle tremor in his front paws. Michael, feeling the vibration through the leash, crouched down and touched the fur of the German Shepherd. "Zeus, it's okay now, buddy," he murmured, trying to calm him down, but Zeus seemed to hesitate, his gaze still fixed on the spot where Chuck had disappeared. It was as if he knew that man wasn't just a temporary threat, but a problem that could resurface. Michael, gently touching Zeus's snout, whispered, "You feel something I don't you?" These words, though simple, carried deep weight. They reflected the unwavering trust he had in his loyal companion. The crowd around them began to disperse slowly, but a few people stayed close, still curious. The Woman who had confronted Chuck took a few steps toward Michael, a concerned look on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice still trembling with adrenaline. Michael nodded, but the furrowed brows revealed the whirring inside him. "I'm fine, but Zeus, he's never reacted like this before. He knows when something's wrong, and that worries me." The woman crouched down, observing Zeus closely. "This dog, he's not ordinary, is he?" Michael sighed, a mix of pride and melancholy on his face. "No, he was a canine, trained to protect, serve, and if necessary sacrifice everything, but that was years ago. I thought he had left all that behind. Now he's my guide, my family." The woman looked into Zeus's eyes, as if trying to decipher something only he knew. "Maybe he never forgot who he is," she replied almost in a whisper. The older man who had intervened earlier stepped closer. "Listen, son," he began, his voice deep and filled with wisdom. "Dogs like him have instincts that go beyond what we can understand. He didn't react like that by chance. You should trust him and maybe stay alert. That man Chuck, he didn't seem like the type to give up easily." The stranger's words resonated with Michael, who gently tightened Zeus's leash. The German shepherd looked at him, his eyes expressing something words could never translate. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, the rumble of engines. They were no closer, but they hadn't completely disappeared either. Michael took a deep breath, stroking Zeus's head. "Maybe it's just my imagination," he thought, but the tremor in Zeus's body said otherwise. What he didn't know was that this incident was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test not only Zeus's loyalty, but also Michael's strength to face the unexpected. The tension seemed to have finally faded, but not for Zeus. Although he was now lying next to Michael, his breathing was still faster than normal, his eyes alert to every movement around them. Sensing the dog's restlessness, Michael decided it was time to leave the cafe. He grabbed the leash and stood up slowly, offering a nervous smile to the few people still nearby. "Thanks for sticking around. I think Zeus and I need some fresh air," he said before starting to walk down the sidewalk. The walk back home was something Michael and Zeus did every day, but that morning each step felt laden with meaning. The silence was only broken by the sound of Zeus's paws on the pavement and the soft jingle of the leash. Michael couldn't see the world around him, but Zeus's behavior spoke louder than any sight could. He was tense, his posture signaling that he was on high alert. It was a subtle but constant reminder that something still wasn't right. When they arrived at Michael's small apartment, he unclipped the leash, allowing Zeus to roam freely around the space. "You're acting strange today, buddy," Michael remarked as he fumbled around the kitchen counter for Zeus's water bowl. The German shepherd moved slowly through the apartment, sniffing every corner as if conducting an inspection. Finally, he stopped by the door, sitting quietly but with his ears perked, listening for any sounds from outside. Michael noticed this, furrowing his brow. "What's going on, Zeus? You never do this." As Michael sat on the couch, trying to process the events of the morning, he began to remember the stories he'd heard about Zeus before adopting him. He knew Zeus had a background as a canine, but he'd never learned all the details. Zeus had served in tough cases where his ability to detect danger had saved lives, and now it seemed those instincts were returning. "Are you trying to tell me something, boy?" Michael asked, petting the dog's soft fur. Zeus only responded with a slight wag of his tail, but his eyes never left the door outside. The distant rumble of a motorcycle echoed again, almost imperceptible. Zeus raised his head, his whole body tensing once more. Michael didn't hear the sound, but he felt the dog's reaction. He placed a hand on Zeus's shoulder, as he always did, to comfort him. "Whatever it is, we in this together," he said softly. Little did Michael know that promise would be tested very soon in a way he could never have imagined. The evening came quietly, wrapping the small neighborhood in a blanket of calm. Michael sat at his modest dining table, carefully slicing an apple as Zeus rested by his side. The tension from earlier lingered in the room, an unspoken weight that neither Michael nor Zeus could ignore. Michael's fingers grazed Zeus's fur as he spoke almost to himself. Maybe I'm just overthinking this, huh? Buddy, he muttered. Zeus's ears twitched, his sharp eyes fixed on the front door. As though he anticipated something, Michael could not see outside. The quiet was shattered by the distant hum of engines. At first faint, it grew louder, more distinct. Zeus immediately stood, his body rigid as he stared at the door. Michael, sensing the change, froze. What is it, Zeus? He asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. The engine stopped, suddenly, followed by a heavy silence that pressed against the thin walls of the apartment. Michael reached for his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. Stay calm, he whispered to himself, though his heart pounded in his chest. Moments later, a knock echoed through the apartment, sharp and deliberate. Zeus let out a low growl, positioning himself between Michael and the door. Michael hesitated before standing, his hand gripping Zeus's leash tightly. Who is it? He called out, his voice firm but wary. There was no immediate answer, only the sound of faint murmurs outside. Michael's pulse quickened. He could feel Zeus's tension through the leash, the dog's readiness to defend if necessary. I'm not opening the door until you say who you are, Michael declared finally. A voice responded, deep and vaguely familiar. Relax, man, it's just me. Chuck. The words sent a shiver down Michael's spine. Zeus barked sharply, his growl deepening. Michael's grip tightened on the leash as he stepped back, creating more distance from the door. What do you want? He asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Chuck's tone shifted, trying to sound casual, but the underlying menace was clear. Just wanted to talk, man. No hard feelings from earlier, right? Michael didn't reply immediately. His mind raced, weighing his options. Zeus, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained poised and alert. The silence stretched, and Michael could feel the weight of Chuck's presence just beyond the door. You need to leave, Michael finally said, his voice steady but resolute. The murmurs outside grew louder, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps, but Zeus didn't relax. Neither did Michael. Something about the encounter felt unfinished, like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. The uneasy silence that followed Chuck's departure was short-lived. Michael paced the living room, his fingers trailing lightly along the familiar contours of the furniture as he tried to calm his thoughts. Zeus, however, was restless. He moved to the window, his large frame tense as he sniffed the air and stared out into the night. What is it, Zeus? Michael asked, more to himself than the dog. The unease in his chest was growing, a gnawing certainty that Chuck wasn't finished with whatever game he was playing. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps broke the quiet. They were muffled, deliberate, circling the perimeter of the apartment building. Zeus let out a sharp bark, his body coiled like a spring. Michael froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He reached for the phone on the counter, his fingers fumbling to dial 911. Stay calm, he whispered to himself, though every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. Zeus moved to stand by the door, his growl low and steady, a warning that reverberated through the small apartment. Michael connected with the emergency dispatcher, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. There's someone outside my apartment, he said, gripping Zeus's leash tightly as the dog's growls grew louder. I think they mean trouble, the dispatcher assured him. That officers were on their way, but the minutes felt like hours outside. The footsteps grew closer, more deliberate. Then came the sound of something scraping against the window pane, a subtle menacing noise that sent chills down Michael's spine. The scraping stopped abruptly, followed by a muffled curse from outside. Zeus barked again, this time louder, his body pressed against the door as though daring the intruder to come closer. Michael, his grip firm on Zeus's leash, backed into the corner of the room, his mind racing. He felt helpless, reliant on Zeus's instincts and the hope that help would arrive in time. They're coming, Zeus, he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Just hold on. Finally, the faint wail of police sirens pierced the tense air. The footsteps outside ceased immediately, followed by the sound of someone running away. Zeus remained on high alert, his growl softening but not disappearing entirely. Michael exhaled shakily, gripping the phone as he whispered into the receiver, "They're here, thank you." Relief washed over him momentarily, but it was tinged with the realization that this wasn't over. Chuck had crossed a line and Michael knew he needed to prepare for whatever came next. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the street in an eerie glow as two police officers approached Michael's apartment. Zeus, still alert, stood by the door, his ears perked and body rigid. Michael opened the door cautiously, feeling the rush of cool night air against his face. "Officers, thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the fear lingering in his chest. Zeus didn't relax, his sharp eyes darting toward the shadows outside as if sensing danger still lurked. "The officers asked Michael to recount everything, taking notes as he described the earlier confrontation with Chuck and the ominous sounds around his apartment. "He didn't do anything physical," Michael admitted, gripping Zeus's leash tightly, "but he's unpredictable, and I know he'll come back." One officer knelt down to pet Zeus, though the dog remained on edge, his gaze fixed on the perimeter. "Your dog's instincts are sharp," the officer said. "If he's this agitated, you're right to be cautious." As the officers swept the area, they discovered fresh footprints near Michael's window. They followed the trail, but found no sign of Chuck or his friends. "He's probably long gone," one of them said, though their tone didn't inspire confidence. They advised Michael to stay inside, keep his phone close, and call if anything else happened. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the other officer assured him, "but if you feel unsafe, don't hesitate to leave for the night." Michael nodded, though he had no intention of running. This was his home, and he wasn't about to let Chuck take that away from him. After the officers left, the apartment felt heavier with silence. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, Zeus lying at his feet, still watchful. He reached down to stroke the dog's back, the familiar motion grounding him. "I don't know what's coming next, Zeus," he murmured, "but I know you'll be ready." Zeus's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and for the first time that evening his tail gave a faint wag. It was a small moment of reassurance amidst the uncertainty. Michael finally drifted off to sleep, though it was fitful and restless. Zeus, ever vigilant, remained by the door, his body a protective barrier between Michael and the world outside. The bond between them had never felt stronger, forged in the fire of shared fear and trust. Whatever Chuck planned, Michael knew one thing for certain: he wasn't facing it alone. Zeus was more than a guide dog or a former canine. He was a guardian, a partner, and a reminder of the strength that comes from standing together for